Will you save my mom's life for this? The words, small and desperate, hung in the air, echoing in the midnight quiet of a biker clubhouse. 3 little girls, clutching a crumpled $5 bill, stood before a room full of hardened men. They thought it was a joke. It wasn't. The room, usually loud with the jukebox and clinking glasses, went silent. Tough men, frozen mid-conversation, slowly turned toward 3 small faces, wet with tears, yet set with an urgency that made the air feel thin. They were Emma Rodriguez, 9, the oldest, and the one who kept clearing her throat as if she had rehearsed something. Her cousin, Lila, 7, with a bruise nicked at the edge of her sleeve, and Maya, 6, who barely met anyone's eyes and held the $5 bill between 2 sticky fingers, like it was both a prayer and an accusation. The bill was soft and coffee-stained. Someone had smeared a child's crayon heart in the corner. They pushed it forward on a tabletop of scarred wood. "Will you save my mom's life for $5? Emma asked, voice small but exact. The question landed like a pebble dropped into a lake, the ripples caught in faces that had long since worn armor. Hammer, who ran the chapter and had a face mapped by 1,000 roads, sat at the head of the table with a beer that had gone warm. He looked at the girls, at the bill, at the bruise. The clubhouse smelled of oil, stale beer, and something sweet, old lemon oil rubbed into motorcycle handlebars. Hammer kept his own hand still. He had a way of listening like he was letting something heavy settle. Raven, the chapter's only woman, who also held a social work certification and a clean foster parent record in her wallet, was the first to rise. She moved toward the girls with the same careful speed she used when calming children after fireworks. Tank, the sergeant-at-arms, and Doc, a medic who'd learned his trade in a different life, closed ranks quietly. Wrench, who handled the club's tech and fundraising, switched on his phone and put Twitter, bank apps, and crowdfunding tabs into a flurry. The story came out in fits. Rosa Rodriguez, the girl's mother, had been fighting cancer for months. The family had drained what little savings they had on basic care, on gasoline for hospital trips, on promises they would pay the next bill. Rosa's insurance covered standard chemo, the doctor said, but a new, experimental immunotherapy available through a clinical trial had shown promise for her type of tumor. It was not a guaranteed cure. It was expensive. And the guardian who should have been helping, Rosa's brother, the girl's uncle, had conditioned his help. "He says he'll pay only if we go live with him," Lila said, twisting the sleeve over the bruise as if to hide it. "He says we're better off there, that he'll take care of us, forever." The girl's words were careful. There was fear braided through them. Hammer's knuckles whitened around his mug. Raven's jaw tightened in a way that made the bridge of her nose crease. These were not problems strangers could walk away from. Outside, the neon sign hummed, and in the reflection of a chrome tank, a man waited. Robert Chen, uncle, guardian on paper, man who'd offered to sign consent forms if the girls would sign away their living arrangements, leaned on his truck, jaw set. He smiled when he thought the smile would do the work it always had, intimidate into silence. Inside, his name slid forward in whispers. Someone asked if he had a record. Someone else thought of the way the girls flinched. Hammer rose and walked to the door. He stepped out into the cold air that smelled like exhaust and late-night tacos. He didn't shout. He spoke with the quiet of someone who had seen too many arguments end with police and too many promises break with time. "This is a family matter," Robert said, folding his arms as if folding himself into an unbreachable wall. "You all got no right." "We got a right to hear kids who come here looking for help," Hammer said. His voice was low. "Tell me you're going to help them or you're not. That's it." Robert smiled, the smile of someone who thought money covered all surfaces. "They're my nieces. I make decisions." Raven, positioned partly in the doorway with her hands visible, said, "If you're the one who's going to make decisions, then answer us this. Why would you demand they live with you forever if you're going to pay for their mother's treatment? Why put that as the price?" The flicker in Robert's face was quick, like a match struck and nearly blown out. Hammer had a phone recording but didn't flash it. He simply asked for the details of the treatment, the name of the clinic, the doctor. He called the clinic and asked to speak with the oncologist listed on the paperwork. Doc listened to the line and compared notes. Wrench lifted the girls' written papers, the one-page note Rosa had left with them that explained the clinic's offer. The pieces began to arrange themselves. Hammer didn't threaten. He did something else, harder for men like him. He leaned into accountability. He told Robert they would help bring a solution, but he would not allow coercion. He would not let an adult trade care for custody.
He told Robert the girls had already been recorded telling the story. He said they'd be taking all relevant evidence to authorities and to the hospital. He said they would make the demand simple, sign the consent or step aside and let the hospital and social services process this as it should be handled. Robert scoffed, a man who relied on bluster. He made a few thin threats, called the situation private, and then when listeners in the parking lot made the unspoken legal moves, Hammer's phone quietly pinging Detective Sarah Morrison's number, Robert decided staying might be worse than leaving.
He climbed into his truck and drove off before anyone could get his plate number, but not before Wrench had his photo saved and Hammer had made a quick phone call to a detective. Detective Sarah Morrison listened. She had a habit of answering midnight calls about kids like they were the most important cases on her desk, which they always were. She asked for the girls' names, for the uncle's full name. She told Hammer to keep anything the children said on record, to let the girls be witnesses with Raven there to support them. She started a case. She asked for any digital trail she could get, texts, emails, any payment promises. The legal net was beginning to close. "You do realize we can't promise anything," the hospital's intake nurse had said earlier on the phone when Doc called to confirm the experimental trial existed and whether the family met initial criteria. The trial required vetting, a consent process, and a significant transfer of funds to secure a slot. The doctor on call, Dr. Alvarez, said quietly, "This option could be meaningful for Rosa's tumor subtype, maybe 40%, maybe less. There are risks, and there's paperwork. We'll do our best, but I want your group to know we need to see clear consent and financial arrangements." "Then we will make the arrangement," Hammer said. What followed was a lesson in how fast a small community can move when it decides a life is worth the sprint. Wrench pulled his laptop into the back room, fingers moving like a mechanic tuning an engine. He set up a crowdfunding page under a name that was both blunt and stirring, Rosa Schott. He wrote a short note, no drama, just the facts that mattered. The experimental treatment, the clinic, the cost, the girls' ages, and a bank account linked to the chapter's verified nonprofit fund. He posted photos of the 3 girls with permission from Raven, careful to preserve dignity. He tagged veteran networks, motorcycle clubs across 3 states, a network of old friends from the VA hospital, and a few local stations that had covered the club's charitable drives in the past. Hammer called every person he could. He called the motorcycle chapters in the next city and the one after that. He called a woman who ran a small restaurant that had donated meals to families in need. Doc texted a contact at the hospital who could expedite the initial screening. Raven filled out a social work referral to Child Services, offering to be temporary foster care and explaining the urgency and the presence of community backing. The social services caseworker, initially cautious about a biker chapter's involvement, read Raven's foster history and the voicemail from Dr. Alvarez and agreed to open an emergency placement assessment with Raven as a potential caregiver. This was not the normal path, but this was not a normal night. What made that $5 matter was what the girls' courage catalyzed. In less than 12 hours, the solitary, coffee-smudged Belle raised more than $20,000 through small donations from neighbors, from strangers who had seen Wrench's post, and from a couple of veteran donors who wired emergency funds after confirming Dr. Alvarez's number. The club's own emergency fund covered transportation and immediate expenses. Someone from a neighboring chapter arranged a vehicle to transport Rosa if the clinic required it. The money that started as a single desperate offering had become a lifeline. But the group never pretended money alone fixed everything. Hammer and Raven both made sure the girls had legal protection. Recordings were handed to Detective Morrison, who opened a collated file that connected Robert Chen to past complaints in other counties, allegations that rarely made it into court because victims were afraid or lacked proof. Now there were 3 small voices, a recording, and a community ready to testify. The detective promised to pursue every lead, to work with out-of-state contacts where similar reports had been logged, and to do so without exposing the children to more trauma. At the hospital, reality was cool and bright. Fluorescent lights and the soft beep of monitors replaced the smoky hush of the clubhouse. Dr. Alvarez met the group and walked them through risk and benefit with a clarity that was both clinical and humane. "This is not a cure guarantee," she said. "Statistically, for Rosa's tumor subtype, the new protocol has shown meaningful responses in maybe 40% of carefully selected patients. Side effects can be severe. We will need informed consent, an overnight stay, and stable finances to cover the trial's initial costs." Raven signed on the spot to be temporary guardian for the girls while their mother entered treatment. She filled out foster paperwork, gave references, and the social worker approved an emergency foster placement with expedited logistics. No one pretended the system was perfect, only that they were acting inside it. Doc handled transfer codes with the hospital and made sure a bed would be held. The image of the girls sitting on folding chairs under the clinic's harsh lights, Lila hugging a stuffed animal, Maya watching the clock, felt impossible, and yet it was what had to be done.
Treatment began after forms were signed and an initial transfer went through. The first dose was administered with a bedside vigil of people who were family by choice: Hammer, Raven, Wrench, Tank, Doc, and the girls, who took turns clutching Rosa's hand. Dr. Alvarez sat at the far side of the bed and explained each step, never offering false hope. "There's a shot at meaningful improvement," she said. "We need to watch for infections and autoimmune responses. We're cautious, we're realistic." The waiting stretched like taffy. At night, Hammer paced outside the clinic, hands in his pockets, thinking of roads he'd ridden and the faces of kids he'd promised to keep safe.
Raven slept in a small fold-out chair and woke at the slightest breath from Rosa. Wrench updated the fundraiser and posted receipts and confirmations so donors could see where their money went. Donations kept coming. $2 from a stranger, $100 from a vet who'd served in Iraq, a plate of tamales sent to the hospital family lounge. The community knitted itself together, not for an image, not for applause, but because someone had asked for help in a voice too steady to be ignored. In the background, Detective Morrison's work unfolded. She found a pattern, a few similar reports scattered across jurisdictions, calls that had been dismissed or not pursued because victims lacked corroboration. With the recording, the girls' statements, and a list of financial transactions showing Robert's attempts to link support to custodial control, Morrison had leverage. She coordinated with county prosecutors and explained the case not as a headline, but as a web of coercion. Legal professionals began to consider charges tied to coercive control and financial exploitation, along with the pending child welfare investigation. The first scan after treatment showed tentative improvement. Dr. Alvarez used measured language. "It's early. The tumor has shrunk slightly. We need further scans in a month to confirm. This phased response is encouraging, but not decisive." That caution felt fragile and precious. The girls cried at the sight of their mother opening her eyes without the weight of pain in them. Rosa whispered to them, voice thin but strong, "You brought me here. Don't ever think you were small." Weeks passed. The treatment took more time than a single night could buy. There were setbacks: fever, a reaction to a drug that sent Rosa into a brief, terrifying night where monitors and alarms filled the ward. Doc slept in a recliner, hand on Rosa's arm, humming things he'd learned in field hospitals to distract himself from fear. Hammer went to his room in the clubhouse and lay awake thinking about the cost of inaction. He knew the community had done what it could, but the journey was not done. Raven's role did not end at paperwork. She became the girls' unofficial guardian, taking them to school, balancing homework with hospital visits, teaching them how to fold bandages and write letters to their mother. She explained to them, in the plain language of someone who had worked with trauma for years, that the right kind of bravery is sometimes what you do after you're scared. "You all did the bravest thing," she told them once, sitting on a futon in the back room of the clubhouse while the girls ate Shirley Temples Doc had procured. "You asked for help." There was formalization to the arrangement. Child Services assigned a caseworker who came by and evaluated Raven's home. They stayed in frequent contact with Detective Morrison to avoid re-traumatizing the children.
There were meetings and legal signatures, and the system worked bent and imperfect, but it worked. The girls slept in a room with posters of stars and planets, and a small shelf where Hammer placed a toy motorcycle for them to share. The $5 bill never left focus. It lived in Raven's pocket for a few nights, and then, with the girls' approval, moved to Hammer's jacket until they decided what to do with it. Wrench took the bill, smoothed it flat against a piece of cardboard, and framed it behind glass with a small plaque that read, $5, a promise. The club mounted it on the wall by the door where folks came in and out, people with weathered faces who would stoop to touch the glass with reverence. The bill, folded and creased like a map of a journey, became a lesson. Small courage can buy time. Time can buy a chance. As Rosa's scans continued to show gradual improvement, the group began to think about long-term care. The experimental treatment needed follow-up and monitoring. Social services planned a care schedule, integrating Raven to hospital and community support. Wrench set up a dedicated fund with clear reporting and a small board made up of club members and a hospital liaison to ensure financial transparency. The club, in what had once been a place of midnight laughter and rough stories, slowly leaned into a new identity: protector, fundraiser, neighbor. Legal accountability kept moving. Detective Morrison's file grew thicker. The case triggered interest in a pattern that had affected families across county lines. Prosecutors contacted colleagues in neighboring states. Robert Chenin fled, but his trail had left enough marks: a record of payments, messages offering support in exchange for custody, and the recording Hammer had taken and submitted. The law took its time: cautions, warrants, and formalities, but the chapter's choice to document and report shifted the story from one of possible private silencing to public investigation.
Months later, Rosa walked out of the hospital with a small duffel bag and a smile that had been missing for a while. The scans were not a final answer. The doctors were clear about ongoing monitoring and the possibility of relapse. Still, the tumor's reduction was significant enough to allow her a plan for everyday life. The girls ran to her and wrapped arms around her with the clumsy wool surrender of children who had watched someone return from a dark place. A crowd had gathered outside the hospital entrance. Club members, neighbor donors, the small restaurant crew that had brought meals, and Detective Morrison, who came to share a brief, hard-smiled moment of support. The framing ceremony for the $5 bill came that night in the clubhouse. People came early and filled the room with voices that were softer than usual. Hammer said a few words. Not preachy, just a gut-level truth. "We're not saints," he told the room. "We're strangers who turned into something else, because kids asked us to be."
This $5 is for the moment when someone small trusted us. It's for the time when we chose to be on the right side of a kid's story. Raven spoke about the girls, about courage, about the way children can make adults accountable. Doc talked about the hospital's role and the need for community funding when trials are expensive. Wrench explained the fund's transparency. Detective Morrison stood and said something that felt like the room inhaling. "We will keep working. You did right by those children. Keep bringing things like this to us. We'll follow through." They pinned the faded bill in a frame and hung it by the door. New members who joined the chapter would see it first. Old members touched it. The plaque beneath the glass recorded not just an amount, but a covenant. The girls' ask, the club's response, and the world's small capacity to change with one instant of courage. The story, though, did not end in a single night of relief. Rosa's follow-up scans stretched across months. There were highs and alarming lows. The experimental therapy required adjustments, but the infrastructure the club helped build, a fund, a network of donors, a hospital liaison, and a legal file, meant the family did not fall back into the solitary struggle that had defined their life before. As the weeks turned into a year, changes took root. Maya started school and stopped flinching when her uncle's name was mentioned. She found friends who liked to draw rockets. Lila's bruises faded, and she learned to ride a small bike in the empty lot behind the clubhouse, wobbling and laughing. Emma, the one who had asked the question that night, leaned toward volunteer opportunities. She started helping Raven in small ways, sorting donations, folding shirts, writing thank you notes to people who had sent $2 and a kind word. Detective Morrison's case continued in the background. Robert Chen's name appeared in court files in a neighboring county on charges tied to financial coercion. His email threads and attempts to manipulate became evidence. The law moved slowly, but the pattern was clear now. Victims were no longer isolated. Witnesses had come forward. The club's recordings and the girls' statements were part of a legal scaffolding that prosecutors could build on. In time, the clubhouse shifted from a sanctuary of repair for its members alone into an informal rescue hub. They adopted small programs, a weekly family night where troubled parents could get help applying for grants, a vetted transportation service for medical appointments, and a volunteer roster for hospital visits. Raven helped the chapter set up a liaison with local child services to create a safer, more official pipeline when children were at immediate risk. Doc volunteered to train members in basic childcare and medical first response. Wrench maintained a ledger open to the public showing donors where the money went.
The $5 bill on the wall became an emblem of a promise, not to save everyone single-handedly, but to act when small hands asked for help. Years later, the three girls grew in different directions, but were woven by the same seam. Emma graduated from high school with a scholarship to study social work. She wanted to learn how to make systems better, to make it easier for children to ask for help without feeling ashamed. Lila found mechanics early on and took an apprenticeship in a local shop, often visiting the clubhouse to learn more about engines. Maya, once the quietest of the three, took to art and helped design flyers for the chapter's donation drives. Rosa remained part of that messy, beautiful community, sometimes shaky with scans to come, sometimes laughing loud at a joke about old bikes. They came back to the clubhouse one evening to speak at a small ceremony commemorating the chapter's 10th year of organized outreach. The crowd included people whose lives had been tangentially altered by that one night, donors who had given $5, veterans who had wired funds from overseas, a nurse who brought pastries every Friday. The framed $5 bill hung over the doorway like the beginning of a story. One of the girls, now older, touched the glass and then looked at the room. "This was the night we learned who would stand for us," Emma said into a microphone that didn't need to amplify much, because the room was mostly people who already knew the echo of the tale. "This thing here," she tapped the frame lightly, "is more than money. It's a promise. We keep it." It had become a local legend not because of drama, but because of what small courage can do when community answers it.
The chapter never claimed the role of savior. They called themselves neighbors who had the capacity to act. They had learned to pair moral pressure with legal channels, recordings, Detective Morrison's follow-through, proper documentation, so that accountability had teeth beyond intimidation. They changed how some people thought about who could be a protector, not only suited social workers or sterile institutions, but a ragtag group of people who had lived rough lives and chose to use that experience to shield children. The $5 remained a talisman. New members were told the story at orientation. People who passed it without explanations sometimes asked. The explanation was simple and kept. 3 little girls walked in with $5 and asked for help. They were heard, they were believed, they were protected. Years down the road, the club set up a small nonprofit arm with a clear mission: rapid response funding for medical needs and a vetted, legally coordinated child protection response. They partnered with local hospitals to create emergency evaluation slots for low-income families and with child welfare agencies to streamline foster placements when necessary.
Part of the partnership included a promise that any time children were involved, the club would default to legal process and professional support, not vigilante action. They understood the danger of unchecked force and how easily fear could slip into harm. Their story had taught them that moral pressure needed to be paired with documentation, with detectives, and with care. And in small ways beyond the structural changes, the community softened. A woman who had been skeptical of bikers donated regularly. A man whose life had been changed by a night in the clubhouse a decade ago taught motorcycle maintenance to kids in the neighborhood as a way to keep them busy and safe. The girls, grown now, returned as mentors. Emma's choice to go into social work was the clearest outcome of that night. A kid asks for help, and the world answers by making better systems. If this story moved you, there are real ways to help families facing medical crises and to support organizations that protect children. Check the link in the description for verified resources and local funds that provide emergency medical aid, and for hotlines to report suspected abuse. Small acts of help add up. The legend of the $5 bill is not a myth about instant miracles. It's a record of what happens when 3 small voices intersect with a community willing to act lawfully, generously, and relentlessly. It's about the slow, honest work that follows a dramatic moment: court files and medical charts, signed consent forms and insurance appeals, nights spent in waiting rooms, and months of careful follow-up. In the end, the chapter's clubhouse was still a place of leather and oil, but it was also a place children could knock on and know someone would answer. The framed $5 bill hung as a reminder, one crumpled note behind glass, witness to a night when courage met a network that could turn a small offering into a chance. Years later, when Emma returned to the hospital as a trainee volunteer, she paused outside the clinic's door and thought of that first night. She thought of the way Hammer had sat still and listened, of Raven's steady hands, and of Detective Morrison's patient work. She thought of how many little acts, phone calls, a crowdfunding page, a donated tamale, could build a lifeline strong enough to hold a family. As she walked into the ward, she kept the memory of the $5 with her, not as a symbol of the exact amount, but as proof that bravery, even when small, can cascade into life-changing action. The girls who had once asked a motorcyclist for a life had in time become the ones to give back, reminding a neighborhood that protection can come from unlikely places, and that the right kind of courage can create a new legacy, one where small hands are believed, where legal systems are engaged, where communities mobilize, and where $5 can become the beginning of something that lasts. If you want to help families like Rose's or learn how to report suspected abuse safely, please look at the verified resources in the description and consider subscribing to stay updated on real stories of community rescue and support. Share this story with someone who needs to know that courage matters and that sometimes the smallest gifts can change everything.